Dusk and Dawn. I finally got that sequel, so we are ready to go. Please note this game is a direct sequel to the original Crimson Grey, and will make less sense if you didn't play the first one. Do I want to review the story? Yeah, let's do so. John was a high school student struggling with depression, slowly losing his will to continue and drifting further from his peers until he met Lizzie. Yeah, this lovely lady. Though Lizzie was violent and unstable, she claimed that she loved him. With time, John began to believe that she truly did, and that she was simply struggling with problems of her own. Her personal struggles intertwined with one another, supporting each other and slowly reaching toward something like healthy stability. It became clear that Lizzie's condition was no mere phase. It was unstable because her mother had participated in an experiment by a corporation called Koitek. John came to realize that Lizzie would never be a normal girl, even if he accepted her love, and worse, Koitek is becoming aware of Lizzie's existence, and not about to let her go easily. It didn't end well. What? No. See all my editing right here, right now. When it came to the moment of truth, John accepted Lizzie for who she was, even with her instability. They managed to escape Koitek and run away together. But although they had escaped the reach of Koitek, could they actually build a life together where things are peaceful? Can Lizzie remain stable when there isn't a threat for her to fight? Will she be a truly supportive partner to John? That is what the story is about. It's going to be about Lizzie, achieving her long college days. The melancholy melody echoed within her. Lizzie clung to it. There was a time when this melody hadn't been with her, though she preferred not to think about that time. It was before she met him. The melody was sad, but it was his and she loved it. And it was certainly better than emptiness. Lizzie had expected that meeting her special person would change everything, and it had. But to her surprise, it hadn't happened all at once. Instead, they both grew and changed, their life together becoming even more wonderful and her mind growing to encompass it. She had a difficult time pinpointing exactly when she had first heard the melody. It would have been romantic if it had appeared at the same momentous occasion, such as when she met him, or when they first made love, or on some future day when they were finally married. But instead, it had slowly emerged, whispering at the edges of her mind. Smiling to herself, Lizzie began to contemplate the beginnings of the melody more thoroughly, but at the moment her world was disrupted by two people approaching her. Okay. Her eyes flickered over their substanceless bodies, analyzing everything about them. She distinctly knew the girl's name, and had only seen the boy on several occasions, with sophomores like her and John. No physical threat. Lizzie had seen the two of them holding hands on the campus green, and from pupil dilation judged them to be a couple. So, unlikely to be a threat to a relationship. But now that they were approaching her, she put on her usual smile and considered them more carefully. The boy was normal enough, but the girl, she was rather pretty, and she dressed fairly well. It would take so little for her to try to show off what she had. Oh my god, that's just how she sees women? Wow. Was that a glint in her eye? Lizzie's smile widened just a bit as she reclassified the girl as a minor threat. Hey, sorry to interrupt, it's Lizzie, right? That's right, nice to meet you. She responded politely as they introduced themselves, only tracking the information for future reference. Once putting on a friendly mask had been difficult for her, an imitation of something she had only observed. Now she could fake it more easily, mirroring emotions she had when she was with him. It irritated her to waste her smiles on random people who didn't matter, though. As soon as possible, Lizzie encouraged them to get to the point. trying to start a social thing with other couples on the campus. They may be around the same age, but hanging out with single college kids just isn't the same, you know? We don't have many people yet, so if you have any ideas, we're open to them. Either of you. Your husband's name is John, right? Why did she know his name? Lizzie's smile became brittle as she stared over the girl again, searching for the slightest tick that might give her away. She had played it off like she wasn't sure about his name, but she knew Lizzie was sure about it. Perhaps her analysis of their threat was wrong. She had dismissed them as a couple, but neglected to consider how impure most love is. This girl might ignore her partner and target John. Or they could be those sexually adventurous couples she had read about, prowling for other couples. Lizzie had not given a single thought to the subject until this moment, when bloody hatred clawed itself out of her soul. Just as she was about to let these emotions leak out onto her face, Lizzie heard the melody again, over the beating of her heart, sad but calm. She wasn't sure what John would say to her, but the thought of him soothed the glowing rage. It was possible that the girl hadn't wanted to seem too forward, like they had been tracking them. Checking their faces more carefully, Lizzie saw hints of nervousness and forced casualness. She set aside her main concern, flagging it as a potential problem for future consideration. Only a tiny fraction of a second had passed. Lizzie gave them both an apologetic smile. It's very kind of you, but it's hard for us to have much of a social life. We're trying to get our degrees quickly. Oh, that's a shame. The offer's still open, though. Let your husband know, okay? Okay. With that, Lizzie brushed past them as quickly as she could without seeming rude. Despite the potential threat and new sorts of danger to consider, she also felt a little warm. People thought they were married. They were often together on campus, but Lizzie had thought she had restrained the majority of her affection for when they were alone. The warmth drained away slowly as Lizzie went about her business, though. They still weren't married. John was willing to tie the knot, but the thought of it made her heart leap into her chest. It had nothing to do with the idea of being with him. Lizzie berated herself for the very thought, and everything to do with how she was sure that the wedding would draw bad luck to them somehow. At first she hadn't wanted to get married because she was afraid that the official record could draw Koitek down onto them somehow. But over 2 years have passed since the violent incident, and it was clear that they had escaped. Enrolling in college hadn't drawn any negative attention either, so it was safe for them to get married. And yet something would go wrong. Even if they didn't invite anyone, she was sure that someone would ruin their day. And while no one could possibly ruin their relationship, she would only have one wedding day. She wanted it to be perfect. Suddenly the people around her were too many, faceless, soulless creatures, moving past her indifferently. The drone of their voice drowned out the melody. Stopping in place, Lizzie frowned, struggling to regain it, but his melody had drifted out of her mind, and no amount of thinking about the joy she felt with him would bring it back. Checking the time, Lizzie decided that she had enough before she needed to go to class. Normally, she preferred to arrive early. That was no longer her priority. The initial buzz of class, which she usually found passable, if a pale second of being with him would no more disrupt her. It was difficult to hold herself back, but Lizzie managed to sprint across campus no faster than an ordinary runner. This wasn't the first time, but someone from the track team had actually tried to recruit her. That was unacceptable. The track uniforms were flattering, but everyone would be wearing them. Of course, he would come out to the events to be supportive, but that meant his eyes would be assaulted by the entire female track team. That could not be allowed. Wow. Oh, get yourself a girl. Let's see where the mouse is gonna go. I just let the mouse do its thing. with both hands, forcing the thought away. She didn't need to do that anymore. The hollowness within... Oh no, I forgot to save first. My bad. The hollowness within her grew and grew as she left campus. Fortunately, their little apartment was nearby. A split home provided as housing for couples. It had taken serious work to obtain one, despite not being married, as the fools in administrations thought there was a chance that she and John might break up. Since it was 2:52, John was likely to be reading for a class. He had reference to paper being due soon, but he never went down to the computer lab until she was in class. After all, he knew she might need him. I like how it's always capitalized. His consideration made a warm glow spread through Lizzie, but it wasn't enough. She needed to see him. She had her key in hand as she approached the door. It was already unlocked, as if he had known. She threw it open and rushed inside. John sat on the couch, reading a textbook. He looked perfect. When he gazed up at the noise and saw her there, gasping for breath with her eyes wild, he gave her a comforting smile. "Everything all right, Lizzie?" "Of course it is. I just forgot a book I needed for class." She swept up to him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders and gave him a slow kiss. The sight of him had calmed her considerably, and Lizzie tried to keep the desperation out of the kiss. Yes, this warm intimacy with him was what she needed. There was no sense in giving him anything to worry about. She had found him, the perfect person. Lizzie drew back slightly and rested her forehead against his. Her heart filled with warmth, and his melody strong in her mind once again. "I love you, Lizzie." It made her heart flutter just as much as the first time he said it. "I love you too, John, more than anything." But as happy as her reply was, she sensed that something wasn't quite right. There was a bit of tension in his eyes. Is he carrying some weight? Depression? Has someone done something to him? No, Lizzie realized that wasn't it. He was looking at her with concern, having sensed some part of her neediness. It was wonderful that he was so attentive, but the idea that she had caused him any pain broke her heart. Is there anything you want to talk about? You know what we're gonna do? I forgot to save. Thank you. We're gonna explain it fully. Well, there was a couple. She explained the encounter, hesitating a moment to give him her full thoughts, but eventually sharing. As expected, he wasn't disturbed by her fears, and didn't tell her that she was wrong. John had thought too much... John had been through too much with her after all. You think it was nothing unusual? Judging by what you said, they just sound lonely to me. They probably just wanted to find people to have something in common with. Maybe, but even if that's true, I still don't want them anywhere near us. They're probably stupid, evil people, John. All we need is the two of us. We don't want to be evil and stupid. One or the other. He smiled ruefully, but there was real affection in his expression too. John pulled her into a quick embrace and squeezed her tight. If that's how you feel, we don't need to interact with other people. I kind of want to just keep my head down and graduate anyway. I agree. She cuddled with him for a moment longer, nestling her head against his chest, then reluctantly pulled back, watching her hair as it clung to him. Though she longed to stay, she knew that it was better to get to class. Maximizing time in the short term would only hinder their long-term objectives, and she wanted as much of him as she could possibly get. Lizzie headed to the bedroom. She had one spiral notebook for another. feeling a moment of guilt at the deception. But no, it was better this way. She could take the burden onto herself and leave his life lighter. She left with a kiss and a cheery wave, then crept around the side of the apartment. She had left a little earlier than necessary to arrive to class on time for this very purpose. From the perfect angle, she could see him through the window, going back to his book, studying so seriously to help them have a better life. Lizzie did try to hide the broad smile on her face. Lizzie didn't try to hide the broad smile on her face, just spent a while watching him. There was less need to watch him now that they were together, but she still enjoyed it. When she had been observed, the other girl had to make the despicable assumption that Lizzie was concerned that he would cheat on her. As if such a thing was possible, as if she needed any reason except to look at him. She did like to observe him sometimes to make sure he wasn't sad again. John's depression was mostly under control now they had abandoned that awful Koitek medicine, but she knew it was a part of him that needed to be watched. And though his inner sadness made Lizzie want to run back inside and kiss him again, forget class, and just spend time making love until he looked only happy and relaxed, reluctantly Lizzie pulled herself away and headed toward the lecture hall. John was mentally healthy. He wouldn't forget about her love just because she was away for a little while. She made sure of that. She arrived just a little late, but it was a relaxed university and no one cared too much. Lizzie carefully set out her books and focused on the lesson. There were worse things than classes. If the university declared she couldn't spend a single moment with him, she needed something else to fill her time. With a few exceptions like psychology, classes weren't obnoxious at all. A few actually provided knowledge that might have utility in the future. And all of it had some utility in getting closer to their degrees. Once it had been difficult for Lizzie to think about such long-term plans, but she could see how both of them earning degrees would help them create the life they wanted. But after that, things would become more tangled in her mind. She wanted to be with him. She wanted whatever he wanted, but he was convinced that they should take jobs in the industry, play some small role in preventing pharmaceutical giants like Koitek from being anything as terrible as they'd done at their old high school, or the experiment they had done that led to Lizzie's existence. The idea that John wanted to make sure that they would never be anyone like her again, that she would be the only one. It made her tingle all over. She didn't know he would approve of the thought, but she liked it so much that she kept it to herself. The idea of getting involved with Koitek again, even indirectly, still left her. She wanted what he wanted, of course, a life together. They would have that, no matter what they choose. It would be fine. For once, Lizzie set such thoughts aside and focused fully on class. After the lecture finished, Lizzie practically skipped out of the hall. It had been her last class of the day, and John had likely finished the work that he needed to do in the computer lab. That left them with the rest of the day to themselves. She wouldn't have to leave him again. Lizzie stopped by the store first, since they were low on food. It hurt her pride as a cook that they had to eat ramen, but money was tight. At least she can purchase cheap vegetables and enhance the experience. As she picked out appropriate ones, Lizzie carefully kept track of their spending versus the amount of money she had left. She had aged out of child support. Not that the man who had impregnated her mother had ever been reliable, which, combined with college expenses, left her in a more difficult financial situation than ever before in her life. She was careful to add everything up in her head so that she still had enough money to drop by the pharmacy after getting groceries. There was a small, locally owned one where she felt comfortable getting John's depression medicine. even though it seemed to be getting more expensive these days. Of course, she did still own Abby's house in their hometown, but Lizzie wanted to avoid anything to do with the case of Koitek. Oh my god, but Lizzie wanted to avoid anything to do with it in case Koitek was watching her and John her. Oh my god. But Lizzie wanted to avoid anything to do in case Koitek was watching and John would never want to live there anyway. Perhaps after they graduated, she could sell the house for a down payment on one of their own. The idea gave her a pleasant hum of emotions as she finished her errands and headed back home, so with a spring in her step. But when Lizzie arrived, she found the door locked. She quickly pulled out her key, adding another scratch mark on the lock, but before successfully opening it, the apartment was empty, briefly making her heart hammer in her chest. There was a note on the table, and she seized it, eyes flickering over the words. John had gone to the computer lab and said he hoped to be back before she was, but it might be longer. So she had an explanation. But even as Lizzie breathed a sigh of relief, part of her mind still churned with other thoughts. What if that was some kind of an excuse? No, John would never do such a thing, never. She crumpled the paper in her hands, then nervously tried to smooth it out again. John would never betray her, she knew that. Carried the fact tightly in her heart, but the world was filled with awful people, terrible women who might try to seduce him, even if he pushed them away. The idea of one of them laying a hand on him. And what if Koitek got a hold of him somehow? They'd already tried once to use him to get her. She thought they were safe now, but what if she was wrong? Once Lizzie might have flown out the door and hunted him until she could be sure that he was safe. Now, she found herself pacing. Fingers tingled in her hair as she tried to quiet the thoughts swimming in her head. On a whim, Lizzie grabbed the extra spiral notebook she had taken and left it down the table. She began furiously writing everything in her head, letting the thoughts out to give herself a little relief. She'd done this once, before she had met him. Just like she collected pictures of him. Now that she had the real thing, she neglected such habits. But they had helped her once, perhaps they could again. Finally, she was done. Lizzie took a deep breath and looked over the pages of furious scribbling. Some of the thoughts there embarrassed her. She needed to trust him utterly, but it was good to get them out of her head and onto paper. She felt calm again, and the memory wafted from the deep recesses of her soul. The place where she kept him, comforting her even now. The pages were a mess. She returned from the edge. As he realized that she was gripping a knife in the other hand, after a pause, she set it down. Though her mind was clear, she still wasn't sure what to do. Obviously, John would never cheat on her. He had been very considerate to leave a note, and no doubt that explained the situation. It was also unlike that anything terrible would happen to him. She still missed him, though, and wanted to drown the rest of her fears in his presence. It was possible that he would be unhappy if his work had gone on too long. He might be happy to see her. Lizzie closed the notebook, put it with her others, considering what she should do. Sorry. Let's start making dinner. It made her anxious not to take action, but Lizzie kept herself from leaving. Instead, she set about making dinner, trying not to watch the door or listen too closely for his arrival. Lizzie set about cutting vegetables, removing the bad portions and reducing the rest to appetizing chunks. Her knife flickered satisfyingly, perfectly balanced in her hand. They might need to make do in many ways, but she had excellent kitchen knives to work with. Even when money was tight, he had never suggested selling her knife collection. She would have, though. would have gladly sold every knife and every single thing she owned for his sake. Knife still flying, Lizzie frowned to herself. No, that wasn't right. She'd need her axe and a few knives to defend him properly. Plus, John wouldn't want her to give up everything like that. Considering such warm thoughts, Lizzie flipped her knife around her hand a few unnecessary times as she finished cutting. Not the kind of thing she would do in public, but at home where no one can see her but John, and he wouldn't be afraid of her. It was too early to cook anything, so Lizzie set the chopped vegetables aside and converted the rest into a salad. She smiled to herself, but realized that she was out of preparations. Her gaze wandered toward the door. Fortunately, in that very moment, she heard his footsteps outside. Lizzie was torn between rushing to greet him and waiting by her work, which made her hesitate long enough for him to enter. Sorry, I got held back. It's no problem at all. I'd gotten things ready for dinner. Looks like you've been busy. I'm really hungry. So is eating early fine? Of course. Since she'd done her preparations already, Lizzie just set the water to boil and added a few other flourishes. Ron sat at the table and she beamed at him, happy to be working together. Eventually they both sat down together at the opposite sides of the small table. It was nothing much, but it was theirs, and that was wonderful. She would have been happy to just watch him eat, but she knew that he loved to talk to her even more. The idea that he wanted her to open herself to him, even her darkest thoughts, already made her happy. But for today, she had nothing particularly dark on her mind. So, you implied that you got holed up in the lab? Mostly, it was nothing unusual. It was just had to answer some questions. But Dan caught me at the end, wanting me to switch shifts at the library. He wanted me to do tonight, which I said wouldn't work, so we had to do some weird rescheduling. Hasn't that been happening a lot lately? Yeah, and I might try picking up some extra shifts. Figured it wouldn't hurt, right? No. But she didn't like him to stay away from home more often. Lizzie had admitted that the library job was a good one, allowing him to study or read for most of the time, but she didn't like it. At least she could visit him without being a hindrance. Why did he feel the need to work so much, though? Lizzie had her own campus job, and the numbers of their debt weren't too awful thanks to the scholarships. Would it be better if they could get rid of it? Maybe she should consider going back to the house and selling it after all. Though she considered asking him all these questions, Lizzie decided to hold back. John had many concerns of his own, and adding her anxiety to those might make him depressed again. She was stronger, so it was better for her to shoulder the burden. After dinner, they moved to the couch to work. It was a ratty old thing they'd taken off the curb, but it was fairly soft and it served to hold them. They sat at opposite ends, each with their textbook, their feet touching in between. Ew. Just being able to be so near him, so comfortably. Lizzie slid her feet against his leg, and gave him a bright smile when he looked up at her. An old part of her wanted to act immediately, to be gross before the moment could pass. But they had been together for 2 years. For moments like this, they were hardly a rare thing. Slowly her mind had learned that she didn't need to be desperate. The life she wanted with him was filled with moments like this too. Despite her thoughts curling around him, Lizzie finished her work rather quickly. Because of it, in a sense. It was a purpose to so many actions that had once been just going through the motions. Lizzie saw he was still busy working and spent a little time admiring him. She loved the look of concentration as he became fully absorbed in something. It was even better when it was directly toward her, but just his concentration was cute too. she could have watched forever. But once she got her fill, Lizzie stood up. She kissed him on the cheek, then headed to the other side of the apartment. They didn't have a lot of space, but there was enough for her to retrieve her axe from the cupboard and experiment with it a little. She hadn't experienced any more physical instability since the incident, leaving her very capable of protecting him, but she needed to be cautious. Though she didn't like to think about it, Lizzie had to admit that there was a small chance that she could hurt John by accident. Though they never had a serious conflict with Koitek again, she needed her knives to feel secure. The idea that she might cause the slightest injury by accident. Lizzie practiced carefully, both following through with all the force she could muster and bringing the axe to a halt at a moment's notice. The practice was soothing, and Lizzie soon found herself smiling. There had been a time in her life, after she had found him, when it was possible that she might harm him, in order to preserve their love, though these thoughts now struck her as alien and horrible. She would never hurt him, never, but that meant she needed to always be prepared. When Lizzie finished, she discovered that John was watching her. She had no doubt that her expression was far from inviting, as she had been imagining cutting down to thrust to them, but he was watching her fondly. Lizzie beamed at him and returned her axe to its place. Are you done studying? For tonight, yeah. There's no point in doing more since I can read at work tomorrow. Then she drifted closer to him, her smile broadening as she poured over his face. He wasn't too tired. He had made a point of saying his work was done, and he had been watching her with gentle affection. She knew there was more there. As he eagerly slid down into his lap, her body pressed against his. Soon she could feel the proof of his desire. Okay. I know you need to get up early tomorrow. Do you want to? You know what? They're adults. We'll just... Oh. What? Hold on. Grinning, Lizzie leaned in closer and kissed him. There had been so many small kisses throughout the day, each adding a little warmth inside of her, so she returned it all, kissing him deeply and passionately. His hands tightened around her waist, holding her a little closer. Most of the hesitation and uncertainty were gone now, since they were familiar with each other. Okay. She had never had trouble needing him too much to be hesitant, but John moved more slowly, sent a thrill through her every time he touched her confidently. Lizzie bent closer to him, and there was a loud knock on the door. Her eyes narrowed to slits as she glared murder toward the entrance. We don't have to answer. Another knock, louder. No, ignoring it was not an option. Lizzie sprung up from his lap and wrenched open the door. The boy on the other side was someone she had recognized from one of John's classes. John said he was intelligent, and Lizzie didn't find him annoying, so under normal circumstances he was fine. At the moment, she only felt rage toward him, rather contained within her smile. He was physically fit, but no threat. Her axe could be in her hand before he... Hey, Aaron, what's up? You guys want to check the news? Jessica Kelsey is gonna seriously just do it. It took Lizzie an anxious moment to identify the name, a public figure, but someone they knew, related to the pharmaceutical industry. Not an immediate threat, but an annoyance at this moment. The news seemed to matter to John, so he headed toward the salvage TV in the corner. Lizzie reluctantly acknowledged that Aaron was going to be an entity in their life, at least for a little while, and allowed him to step inside. Flipping to the right channel, John watched carefully as the news report ran. Aaron slouched against a nearby wall, leaving Lizzie to hover behind John. When she heard Koitek's name, she began to pay full attention, soaking up the information. What side are they talking about? What did we miss? They didn't go into detail, but something about how sloppy pharmaceutical experiments used to be. A whole town of people got sick, bad stuff. Lizzie's heart began to began beating rapidly. Was it possible the report mentioned her? No, not her specifically. There were privacy concerns, but they might have referenced her experiment. His fingers began twitching at her sides, which drew John's attention. He frowned a little, then returned to Aaron. How many cases did they talk about? Anything involving specific individuals? Just general information I heard. Why? The exact question that Lizzie had been afraid of, but John didn't seem disturbed. I used to be a part of a Paxitine trial that didn't go well, at least for me. I was wondering if it got mentioned. Oh, is that how you got clued into all this? Behind them, Lizzie let her fingers relax. John had been thinking of her, hadn't exposed her to any unnecessary attention. Of course he would. She was off for doubting him. While she was feeling a warm glow, she missed John's response. Well, anyway, they only emphasized the biggest cases. Kelsey is trying to prove that the harms are large enough that government policy needs to change. That was how it connected. Francisca? I think it's Siska. Kelsey was a researcher who used to work in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Administration, but left as part of a protest. She had been campaigning for increased powers to regulate pharmaceutical megacorporations since then. Lizzie usually didn't have opinions about politics, but she approved in this case if it did damage to Koitek. She had never seen the woman herself, though. Lizzie watched curiously until the news station played a clip of Francisca speaking about the report and began chewing on one knuckle. Though Francisca appeared serious and dressed professionally, she was too young for Lizzie's taste. Maybe it was fine for John to pay attention to her, since she was doing important work related to both of them, but his attention focused on anyone else had Lizzie anxious. That's good to know. Why'd you run over here? The congressional debates are going to take forever. Oh, that wasn't the urgent part. They said it earlier. Kelsey is going on a speaking tour to raise awareness about the issue. But not all the locations are set. We need to get her on campus, man. Ah, I get it. I don't know how much help we can be, though. Well, and I wanted to ask you if you'd join again. We need more people to lead us if we're going to gain any momentum. John hesitated, looking toward her. His mouth was slightly open, as if to ask something, but he saw the tension in her eyes. Aaron looked back too, but Lizzie pulled her finger out of her mouth, and he couldn't see past her smile. It's gonna be hard for us to commit to that, I think, but keep us informed about what happens, alright? Alright, I won't press. I'm gonna get Kelsey here, though. Surely we're a big enough campus. While John made small talk and walked Aaron out, Lizzie stayed in front of the television and kept watching the broadcast. Koitek had tried to take John away from her. She had feared 1,000 times, and many times he had calmed her fears. But back then, she had been absolutely right. An intellectual part of her knew that it was a huge corporation manufacturing many common drugs. Not all of them were as ill-advised as Paxitine. Not every experiment was harmful. Not every employee could be as terrible as Mrs. Smith. It didn't matter, Lizzie hated them all. But she couldn't hack apart an entire corporation, so she had no choice but to hope that something could be done. That's why she didn't mind people like Aaron so much. They could be useful. Maybe even this Francisca. But that didn't mean Lizzie wanted her to come here, especially since she would bring more attention from Koitek. Was this what she had been fearing? This was why they couldn't get married? Not until an event like this looming in the future? Not while something could go wrong? Well, too soon the broadcast moved to other subjects. Though the pharmaceutical giants were becoming increasingly important to everyday life, they were still usually ignored compared to the banal celebrity news. Lizzie didn't care about that, since random foolish celebrities didn't attract John's eye. She still moved to turn the TV off, though. When she turned her back, she discovered John watching her with concern. She had been aware that Aaron had left, of course, but there was a periphery? Oh, but that was a periphery in her thoughts. Like peripheral, got it. Only now did she reflect on the amount of time that had passed. I worried about it. I was afraid something will happen. Cortec will be watching. John approached and wrapped his arms around her. She eagerly let herself rest against his chest. Maybe, but everyone will be watching. Oh my god. What are words now? Francisca Kelsey is one of their main political opponents, so they will have to know that everything around her will be scrutinized. Even if Aaron gets her to come, I'm sure it will pass without incident. That was logical. It was probably true. And though Lizzie cut and recut his sentence a dozen different ways, she didn't discern any real affection when he spoke the other woman's name. She was just a political figure working on an important case, nothing more. She wasn't a threat. I know, but the reminder has me feeling so stressed. I understand. Let's just get some sleep, okay? Too late, Lizzie realized she had worked against herself. Though she felt anxious and twitchy now, if he had initiated again, she would have happily welcomed it. That grossness would have let her take her mind off everything else for a time. But now, he was just worried that she was only doing it for his sake. And as much as she tried to convince him otherwise, it might trouble him. And that always made things less enjoyable. Accepting the way things had gone, Lizzie smiled warmly at him and pulled them both toward the bedroom. Please hold me until I fall asleep. As they lay together, Lizzie curled up against his side, and she began to feel calm again. Being near him always generated a deep warmth within her, and just laying in his arms like this was peaceful bliss. Maybe John had been right about not doing that night. Her love for him was depthless. But she wasn't as perfect as he deserved. Sometimes her mind wouldn't cooperate, or her past got in the way. What she needed most was to lie here with him, together. For her, it was just another glorious element of their life together. And as John stroked her hair affectionately, she reminded herself that he was happy just to be like this. Smiling, Lizzie drifted to sleep. End of day 1. The warehouse stretched forever in every direction. Sterile white walls yawning toward eternity. In the center of it, there were impossibly tiny, yet they were everything. Her memory of the scene played out again, Miss Smith having both of them trapped, trying to turn them against each other. In real life, she had fought back. John helped her, and trusted her, even at her worst, and they had escaped. But this time, instead of using an injection to cause him pain, Mrs. Smith began removing her clothes. What? She cast Lizzie a mocking smile and then slid into John's lap, pressing herself against his chest. He struggled, but he was bound too tightly to do anything as Lizzie tore out of the room and found herself bolt upright in bed. She had snatched her knife from its place and held it in front of her, gleaming in the moonlight. It took her a moment to come back to herself and realize that it had been a dream. John was laying beside her, coming awake as he had realized how upset she was. There was no fear in his eyes, but she could see deep concern there. Lizzie, you alright? Fine, John, just a bad dream. She gave him a beaming smile and set the knife aside casually. But her acting wasn't good enough. There were still those lines of concern on his face. It was wonderful that he had come to know her better and better, but it meant she couldn't keep herself from being a burden to him. It could be hard to shake those off. Come here and rest, Lizzie. If she wanted to pretend that everything was alright, she couldn't resist his soothing voice. As he curled up next to him again, resting her head into his chest, it did feel wonderful, pushing aside the remnants of the dream. But this wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to protect him. John was the one who was sad, who needed to be protected from the world. He carried so much weight. She couldn't add anything to it. Lizzie bit her lip and squeezed him tighter, wishing she could be perfect. I'm sorry, John. Don't say that. I'm glad I could be here for you. You always are. Come here and try to relax. She snuggled against him, much of her anxiety fading. What if one day he wasn't there? What if someone took him from her? She would bathe the world in blood and would do no good because he would be gone and she would have nothing. As he slowly managed to let go of other thoughts and enjoy his presence. But it took her a very long time to go to sleep. The lecture rolled onward, flowing around the edges of Lizzie's mind. She was absorbing some of the information, but her thoughts were mostly elsewhere. On the page in front of her, increasingly, she'd taken a back corner seat that would be like she was, so that it would look like she was dutifully taking notes, but in fact she was pouring out her thoughts onto the page of her spiral notebook. Lizzie paused a moment, looking over what she had written recently. It was chaotic, but familiar chaos. It had written his name several times, frantically surrounded by hearts. Several times she had drawn little pictures of herself killing Mrs. Smith, and I missed that. Thank you. It was playful, though, and writing out her emotions made her feel a little more stable. Thinking of him always made her smile, but Lizzie had stopped to consider John as analytically as she could. Her mind ran over the roll of images she held of his face, all the small changes in his eyes. He was doing better than usual, she realized, though his smile was sometimes melancholy. It felt appropriate for him, and she didn't see any other signs of depression. There were no shadows in his eyes, and he had been very affectionate last night. The thought made Lizzie squirm a little in her seat, molten lava dripping from her mind all through her body and pooling down inside of her core. She let herself dwell in the shared moment for a long time. Pulling herself out of the thoughts, Lizzie set aside the notebook and returned to her real notes. She didn't need to take many, quickly jotting down key points to catch up to the speaker. When she was done, her mind began to wander again. It seemed that the event planning had gone through. The local campus activist groups had petitioned the right places, so now Francisca Kelsey would be speaking in town. Ew. That was a good thing, theoretically. It would disturb Koitek and would make John happy. Lizzie had read some of her articles to try to vet her, and Francisca seemed intelligent. Her visit would probably give them nice things to talk about. She was married, too, and had been for 6 years. Everything was fine, so Lizzie didn't object to them getting a little more involved in helping set up the event. Everything was fine. Lizzie absentmindedly realized that she was gripping her pen tightly and stabbing it repeatedly into the side of her notebook, leaving it covered in gouges. After class, Lizzie headed out and started to walk her usual path before she remembered that things had changed. Frowning slightly, she changed her route to head to the administration building instead, where she would be meeting with John. Others would be there too. The exact purpose of the event was unclear to her. At a minimum, they would gather and receive information about various activities that they would be doing in preparation for the visit and speech. Presumably, after they would go and do said activities, she could be alone with them. Except that he had except that he had expressed interest, which was reasonable. Perhaps they would participate. He had noticed her anxiousness, however, and not commit to anything beforehand. It was very considerate of him, but made Lizzie vow to do better of supporting him. As she entered the building, she saw a crowd of people had gathered. It appeared to be an ordinary enough college group, likely not a concern, though it was more difficult to evaluate threats in crowds such as this. She searched through the random people in the way, but was unable to find John. Realizing that she was going to be engaged, Lizzie focused on Aaron, who was coming to greet her. Yeah! Aaron and two women. Young, attractive women their age. Wearing clothes that were stylish and extremely suggestive. No physical threats, but potentially. This gave them a brittle smile. Hey Lizzie, good to see you here. Hello. We're just getting organized, but there are a ton of things we need to do. We already printed a bunch of flyers to put up, but we actually got space on one of those big boards, so we need some people to help design a poster. We also... Where's John? Over in the corner. We're going to organize after the... Thank you. Lizzie left them, though she watched Aaron and the others a moment longer. Aaron seemed to have noticed that she wasn't completely happy, which was a problem. Having herself around John made her sloppy, though Aaron also might be more perceptive than average. She headed through the crowd searching for John. Part of her knew that the people were probably decent, given their interest. No, too many of them were just looking for socialization, or a cause that made them feel good about themselves. There were too many of them to judge, and some could possibly be threats. Let's just find John. Oh, retreat and monitor the situation. Retreat, gather weapons, and monitor the situation. Ask Aaron for information. Interrogate Aaron. Find John with knives. Investigate everyone in the room. Eliminate everyone in the room. Ignore others. Ignore targets and find John. Let's, save. And then let's ignore targets. Though many options presented themselves to her, Lizzie decided to take the simplest. Best to be prepared, but not do anything that might disturb John. That left her feeling a little more confident in herself, but Lizzie still searched for his voice in the crowd and focused on him. There he was. Lizzie restrained herself as she simply skipped up to him, taking his arm like any normal girlfriend would do. Her fingers dug into his arm harder than she had intended, and he gave her a look with a hint of concern. Hello, Lizzie. Sorry I'm late. She beamed at John to reassure him that everything was alright, and then also beamed at nearby people. Not likely any threats, but she beamed hard at them anyway. I actually just finished organizing all the different tasks. Aaron is better at drawing people together than organizing the details, you know? Haha, that's so true. Get away. Away from John. Some girl laughed unnecessarily loudly at his observation, prompting Lizzie's full attention to zero in on her. Slight pupil dilation, no visible flushing, heart rate slightly above average. Was that flirting? Was she trying to steal him away from her? But we haven't assigned any tasks yet. What do you think, Lizzie? Do you want help, or do we have too much to do at home? It was an obvious lifeline to her if she was too stressed, and Lizzie loved him for it. Of course she could trust her John. He would always be true to her. Aw, you might have to go. We need all the help we can get. The girl's gaze turned away from John, too deliberately, a ruse, and toward Lizzie. She gave a smile that touched the corners of her eyes, indicating that it was authentic, though Lizzie automatically mirrored it. She only felt a cold hollowness. I was actually hoping you could help us put up flyers. I've seen you around campus, you're super fast. What game did she have in mind with such flattery? She failed to see an advantage the girl gained, but she disliked the situation all the same. Still, there was a wide variety of different tasks available, and not all of them would leave Jean vulnerable. She had delayed too long in answering, leaving an uncomfortable pause. It had been a very long time since her social skills had failed her like that. Worse, it had caused him stress, which was unacceptable. Lizzie pretended to be looking over the organizational sheet to buy herself some time. It's up to you, Lizzie, but I noticed that there were a couple of people moving cabinets and desks out of the supply room, and we're going to use. Think we can do that? Lizzie smiled as she realized that he was offering her a chance. Though John was always considerate, when he was feeling less depressed, he was especially attentive to her concerns. The idea of participating wasn't unpleasant, but it would be so much calmer and more wonderful alone at home. Lizzie looked up, smiled, and made her decision. John's idea is participate together. Take care of it for him, let him participate, but keep him safe. Don't participate. You know, because we want to be normal, right? Like as normal as we can. And he wants to be helpful. So let's go ahead and do it. Our idea sounded fun, John. Let's do that. Seriously, that stuff's heavy. You're gonna end up making him do all the work. Nah, I could provide moral support. Her eyes rolled at them, but didn't try to interfere further. After signing up and getting the appropriate key, that left Lizzie and John to head to the supply room he had referenced. In the old art building, they headed down one of the lesser-used hallways, her arms still linked with his. Being alone together in a place like this brought lovely ideas to mind. But since they were helping a cause that mattered to him, Lizzie restrained herself. Good job. Before too long, they reached the room, which John unlocked. The room inside was reasonably large, but filled with years of ancient desks, cabinets, and other furniture, not to mention a host of random boxes. Nobody wanted this job because his old cabinets are ridiculously heavy. I'm guessing that wouldn't be a problem, though. Lizzie stepped over to one of them and pressed her hand against the side of it, tipping it experimentally. The metal groaned and dust fell off the cabinet, but it didn't feel particularly heavy. There's nobody watching, right? Nah, people don't usually come down here. We're only using it because most of the real meeting rooms are booked right now. And I'll take care of it, no problem. They have a recycling guy coming for the metal. We could just take them out back. Nodding, Lizzie moved to the cabinet that was the most in the way of the others and picked it up without difficulty. The box that was set on top, he was holding the sign, and John signed it before it could fall. Smiling thanks to him, Lizzie carried the cabinet out the door he had referenced and left it at the edge of the back lot. Being made of metal, it was indeed heavier than average, but not really a challenge for her strength. They soon found a good rhythm working together, which made Lizzie glow inside. She handled all the heaviest furniture while John organized the rest and cleared off boxes and other materials that would be in her way. Her strength hadn't been something she had ever given much thought to when she was growing up. First, something to be hidden to avoid attention, and an advantage to be cultivated. It had never been something that brought her any joy. That had changed the day she had saved him from falling. Since then, she had realized that she could use it to protect him. There had really only been a few brief moments where she had to use her strength to its full potential, but she was happy for simple things like this once in a while. The two of them, working to move so many things, reminded her of when they moved into their apartment together. And it made her imagine them moving into an actual home of her own, which was a wonderful thought. She would be overjoyed for that, no matter the circumstance. But it would be most wonderful if it happened after they were married. The tradition seemed meaningless to her in isolation, but the idea of doing it with John. Such thoughts carried Lizzie happily through the rest of the work, making her frequently smile over at John, and he smiled back, seeming much lighter than she had seen him in recent days. Lizzie didn't mind that they were preparing for Francisca to come to speak, working toward it together with him. It didn't really seem like such a bad thing after all. John, can you help me with these? Desks are too long for one person to carry, not without damaging something. Oh, that's why you've been skipping them. Sure, I'll try. He acted as though he might not be able to help, but of course he came to his sister. And it really was true that she needed his help. She wouldn't have wanted him to feel... What? Consented? To? Strong as she was, it would do no good to carry a desk alone. Between the two of them, it was no trouble to move all the desks and finish clearing the room. Plus, she got to watch him on the other side of the desk. He was used to her gaze and didn't mind it, though he needed to focus on their path more than she did to avoid running into things. When at last they were finished, the room was still dusty and stuffy, but at least it was empty. More time had passed than she had expected. John didn't seem as surprised, but she was glad to see a slight smile on his face. Is that much, but we did our part to help. It wasn't a problem for you, was it? Not at all, John. Thanks for thinking of this. Having said that, I'm definitely ready to head home. Me too. Though they were both a little dusty, Lizzie didn't hesitate to link her arm with his and lean against him as they walked home. Getting cleaned up together might be fun. He has to work. With that, I think I'm gonna end the episode here, because it already is kind of getting late. So, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully, I'll see you later.